Hello, my name is Mary Rose, and welcome to The $1 Billion Painting, the podcast where we explore the art market and search for the painting that will be the first one to sell for $1 billion. As always, accompanying pictures and further reading to today's show can be found on the show website. Today, we're going to talk about a dream. The dream of a man who was one of those great 20th century figures who were almost too outlandish to be real. A man whose name became a shorthand for artistic talent. A rare artist in our list whose name, talent, and influence were widely known even during his own lifetime. A card-carrying member of the Communist Party, a suspect in the 1911 theft of the Mona Lisa, a two-time recipient of the USSR International Stalin Peace Prize. I'm speaking, of course, about a man named Picasso. From the beginning, young Pablo was destined to be different. According to his own account, he was born in October of 1881, a blue baby, that is to say, not breathing. Until, that is, one of his uncles swooped the infant Pablo up in his arms and breathed cigar smoke into his lungs, sending him into a fit of coughing, and miraculously bringing the boy to life. Then he was christened, with the name Pablo Diego Jose Francisco de Paula Juan Nepomuceno Maria de los Remedios Cipriano de la Santísima Trinidad Ruiz y Picasso. When reading about Picasso's childhood, one really does get the sense of absolute doting parents who don't quite realize the monster that they are creating. Picasso got his early start in the studio of his father, who was also a painter, but his talent was apparent from an early age. According to Picasso, his mother told him that if you are a soldier, you will become a general. If you are a monk, you will become the Pope. Of course, he says, I was a painter, and I became Picasso. Not everyone likes modern art. I can't count the number of times someone has been discussing an abstract painting with me and said that they thought that the artist was a no-talent scam artist. To which I say, fair enough. But other art historians take issue with that. When explaining to these people why art is worth what it is, and why an artist is considered great, art historians often point to Picasso. Because whatever your feelings are on the man, Picasso could really paint. By the age of 15, he'd become an accomplished academic painter with this realistic academic style that was very much in vogue at the turn of the century. One of his earliest exhibited pieces, entitled First Communion in 1896, received public praise for its beauty and symbolism. It depicts a girl kneeling at an altar, dressed in white. There's symbolism there referring to his Catholic upbringing, and he was just 15 years old. But we don't know Picasso as a great academic painter. When you achieve what most artists in your community spend their entire lives trying to achieve, all by the age of 15, you either stagnate or you evolve. Picasso was at the perfect time to evolve. The post-impressionists had come and gone. Groups like the Symbolists and the Fauvists were part of the new avant-garde. The Fauves, who took their name from an insult levied to them by a French art critic who called them les fauves, or wild beasts, practiced unrestrained use of color. Instead of painting colors realistically in the academic tradition, they used color to convey mood and personality. The most famous Fauve today is Henri Matisse. Later in his career, Picasso would say that Matisse was the only artist he considered on his own level. Matisse, in turn, claimed that the only person who had any right to criticize him at all was Picasso. Matisse's fluid line work and vibrant colors are shocking to the salon scene in the early 20th century, and fascinating to the young Picasso, until they quickly struck up a friendship. Fittingly, then, Picasso's first major break from the style of his childhood was his blue period. In 1901, Picasso's friend, Carlos Casagemas, committed suicide in a Parisian cafe. He was distraught over being scorned by a woman named Germaine Pichot. As soon as he heard of the death, according to Picasso's own account, he was moved to paint somber subjects in somber hues. The blue period only lasted a handful of years, until it was followed by the rose period from 1904 to 1906, when the color palette shifts from blues to pinks. We measure the greatness of artists by their influence. You could be creating the most amazing works of art that the world has ever seen, but if no one knows your name or is engaging their works in dialogue with yours, you will not be considered a great artist. Picasso engaged in a nearly continuous cycle of reinventing himself, starting with the Blue period and the Rose period. So he wasn't just influential in one circle. He was influential in Fauvism, he was influential in Cubism, he was influential in Surrealism, he was influential in photography. There's one famous aphorism that goes that there are only two periods in art. Art before Picasso and art after Picasso. Because no young artists today can all try to situate themselves without entering into some sort of dialogue with his art and his movements that he was involved in. He became the first living artist shown at the Louvre, the first artist on the cover of Life magazine, and he was hailed as one of the greats within his lifetime. And the more you read of his writing, the more you see how he had this ego to match. The story of the painting that we're discussing today begins not just with Picasso, but with the women in his life. Picasso married the Russian ballet dancer Olga Koklova in 1819, and they remained married until her death in 1955. But that didn't stop Picasso from having a string of mistresses, being as they separated. As the kind of alpha, self-important, sexist old man, Picasso was once quoted that there are two types of women, goddesses and doormats. And in the case of his own love life, we might suggest instead goddesses and revolving doors. Picasso had 4 children by 3 different women, and more mistresses besides. Seemingly, with each change in lover, Picasso adopted a different iconic style. Picasso became involved with the young Marie-Therese Walter in 1927, when she was 17 years old and he was 45. She lived across the street from him and agreed to model for the older famous artist. Picasso's paintings give us an insight into what he saw in the young Marie-Therese. She is painted softly, sensually, with curving lines that emphasize her full figure. Her hair is bright yellow. The paintings of Marie-Therese are often filled with sexual imagery or subtext. We almost get the sense of Picasso being obsessed with her youthful fertility and beauty. In 1932, Picasso painted La Reve, or The Dream. In La Reve, Marie-Therese, herself painted in soft pinks and lavender, sits in a red chair, eyes closed in sleep. Her blouse has fallen down to expose one breast, and while Picasso has evolved past the hard-edged analytic and synthetic cubism that he'd been experimenting with during the 19-teens, the perspective remains somewhat mixed. Her face is split in half. Some art historians claim that the face is meant to be split into half Marie-Therese's face and half Picasso's, showing them joined at the lips. Others point out that the upper portion is decidedly phallic in shape. Other portraits of Marie-Therese exist, naturally. Visitors to the Tate Modern might have seen nude Greenleaves and Bust, which is on long-term loan from a private collector. Those who've been to the Museum of Modern Art in New York might have seen Girl Before a Mirror and may recognize Marie-Therese's soft sensuality. She features prominently in his Vallard suite of etchings, created for the influential 20th century art dealer Ambrose Vallard. All told, she modeled for him for almost 10 years, until Picasso fell in love with the surrealist artist Dora Maar. Again, here we're going to see his style shift. Dora Maar is no soft, voluptuous Marie-Therese. She is painted in a disjointed cubist style, often called something like the Weeping Woman. Picasso continued to support Marie-Therese and their daughter financially until he died, and Marie-Therese herself died 4 years after Picasso, committing suicide in 1977. So there are quite a few Marie-Therese Walter paintings by Picasso. I could have pointed to several Picassos to be a candidate for the billion-dollar painting, from any of his periods. But La Reve's story, I think, tells us more about the high-end art market, and it's the story that makes La Reve special. 9 years after La Reve was painted in 1941, the painting was purchased for $7,000 by Victor and Sally Gans. The Ganses were not extraordinarily wealthy people. Victor Gans owned a small costume jewelry business. Certainly not poor, but not the mega millionaires and billionaires that we become familiar with in the course of this podcast. But they were people who had an uncommonly good taste. They're known in the art world as the collectors who never made a mistake. It's almost a fairy tale collection. Every Saturday, Victor Gans would travel from his New York apartment all over the city to investigate galleries and shows. La Reve was their first Picasso. Over the 50-year span of their collection, they amassed works by artists who would shortly become known as giants in the fields of 20th century modernism. Jasper Johns, Eva Hayes, Frank Stella, Robert Rauschenberg. It's estimated that they spent around $2 million collecting these works of art, again over about a 50-year period. When Sally Gans died in 1997, a decade after Victor had already passed, Christie's sold their collection for $206.5 million. On November 11th, 1997, as part of that sale, La Reve sold for $48.4 million, well over the Christie's estimate of $30 million. Already this painting, purchased for $7,000, had become one of the 4 most expensive paintings ever sold at the time. The collector was Wolfgang Flodel, an Australian investment fund manager and art collector, who then sold it on to Steve Wynn in 2001. Steve Wynn is best known for his Las Vegas real estate ventures, and as a man who made the majority of his fortune in the 1990s Las Vegas development boom. The Bellagio, one of the high-end Las Vegas hotels, was a Wynn creation. But more recently, in 2018, Wynn has been pretty well known for being in a spot of trouble over accusations of sexual harassment, which caused him to step down from his position as the CEO of Wynn Resorts. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. In the 2000s and early 2010s, Steve Wynn was one of the most active collectors at the top of the auction market. His name appears again and again, buying and selling. And his Steve Wynn Resorts were peppered with his collection. Monet, Picasso, Matisse. In 2015, he sold Picasso's 1938 Bust de Femme at Christie's in New York, which went to Hong Kong billionaire Joseph Lau. But it took Wynn a while to decide to sell La Reve. In the 1990s and early 2000s, it was a centerpiece of his collection. He even considered the name La Reve when he was naming his Wynn Las Vegas resort. Eventually, he decided that a French name was not patriotic enough. But in 2006, he had decided to part with the painting. He had negotiated with Stephen A. Cohen to sell La Reve for $139 million. Cohen is a hedge fund manager with a net worth today of around $14 billion and a taste for high-caliber art that even a $616 million settlement for insider trading with his firm could not extinguish. He's been listed in Art News magazines and Forbes magazine's lists of the top 10 most prolific art collectors. His collection is peppered with the biggest hits of modern and contemporary art scenes. Willem de Kooning, Jeff Koons, Edvard Munch, Andy Warhol. He's also well known for being the owner of The Physical Impossibility of Death in the Mind of Someone Living, which is British artist Damien Hirst's most iconic work, a 14-foot stuffed tiger shark in formaldehyde. His entire collection today is estimated at around $1 billion, and La Reve would become a major component of that collection. But then, something terrible happens. Wynn is standing in front of La Reve, discussing the painting with some friends. It's the day after he and Cohen had agreed to the deal. He's about to tell the story of the Ganses, names he knows are going to impress. Steve Wynn talks with his hands. He's a big Las Vegas show guy, and he's about to reveal the names of the previous owners. He jerks his right arm backwards and tears a 6-inch hole in Marie Therese's left arm. Can you imagine the aftershock of that moment? Standing there, looking at that gash in the canvas. La Reve was poised to become the most expensive painting ever sold. They had already shook on it. In that split second, the painting was reevaluated from $139 million to $85 million. Wynn received $45 million from the insurance brokers Lloyd's of London for the loss. Needless to say, the sale was halted. That could have been the end of La Reve, one damaged painting consigned to one of Wynn's lesser-known hotels tucked in a corner somewhere. Wynn paid $90,000 to restore the Picasso, and the restoration has been celebrated for its neatness. Apparently you can't see it at all. But that did not bode well for our dreaming woman. And Cohen, if he still wanted a Picasso, had other options. When you look at Picasso's sales records, he's the most represented of any artist on the most expensive paintings lists. But this might also be Picasso's biggest obstacle in the race for the billion-dollar painting. Picasso created a lot of artwork. Picasso once admitted that nothing would give him greater pleasure than being given a whole museum to fill up by himself. Picasso, on that endless cycle of reinventing himself that we talked about earlier, tried his hand at many mediums. Paintings, sculptures, ceramics, set design, photography, printmaking. After his death, he left an enormous warehouse of artworks in various stages of completion, some signed, some unsigned. We've talked previously on this podcast about rarity. Leonardo da Vinci, remember, created less than 24 paintings in his entire lifetime, and only 15 are thought to survive. When a Leonardo da Vinci comes to the market, the art world scrambles, because this might be the last one. With Picasso, paintings go on the market in almost every major show. We're not running out of Picasso. There are over 1,000 works of art that Picasso is known to have created that can't currently be accounted for, possibly stolen, possibly not reported to authorities when passing from hand to hand. One could pop up in a closet somewhere and come to the market at any time. But then, something remarkable happens. In 2013, Stephen Cohen bought La Reve from Steve Wynn. The final agreed-upon price? $155 million. That is $16 million more than was agreed upon 6 years earlier. It would seem that lovers of Picasso just cannot be dissuaded. This is still the most expensive painting known to be purchased by an American collector, and that's why I chose La Reve for today's podcast. There's something undeniable about this painting's charm, about Marie-Thérèse's beauty, about Picasso's name, about the legendary status of collectors like the Ganses, what that does for provenance, and about the collecting habits of billionaire playboys and tech tycoons. But that's not even something that an errant elbow can dislodge. If Stephen Cohen should choose to sell La Reve, we might see our first billion-dollar painting. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this podcast, please be sure to subscribe and leave a 5-star review. It helps more people find their way to the show. You can also find more information about La Reve and other works of art by visiting the website billiondollarpodcast.com. Or you can contact us by tweeting @billionpainting or by email at thebilliondollarpainting@gmail.com. See you next week.